What if everything you thought you knew about an entire country was wrong, not slightly wrong, not partially wrong, but completely and embarrassingly wrong in every direction simultaneously? That country is Brazil, and by the end of this video, you will be genuinely angry that nobody told you the real story sooner. Brazil is the 5th largest country on Earth, the 5th most populous, home to the largest rainforest on the planet, the most biodiversity of any nation ever measured, and a cultural complexity so extraordinary that every simple story about Brazil collapses the moment you look at it directly. Drop a comment right now. What is the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the word Brazil? Because whatever you typed, this video is about to change it completely. Most people picture Brazil as beaches, carnival, and football. And while all three exist and are extraordinary, they represent approximately 2% of what makes Brazil one of the most fascinating, most complex, and most consistently misunderstood countries on Earth. Brazil has been hiding one of the greatest stories in the world behind a very attractive postcard, and this video is finally going to show you what is behind it. Brazil contains the Amazon rainforest, the largest tropical rainforest on Earth, covering approximately 5.5 million square kilometers across Brazil and 8 neighboring countries. The Amazon in Brazil produces approximately 20% of the world's oxygen, contains approximately 10% of all species on Earth, and has river systems so vast that the Amazon River discharges more fresh water into the Atlantic Ocean every day than any other river on Earth delivers in an entire year. Brazil has more species of plants, birds, freshwater fish, and mammals than any other country on Earth, a biological richness so extraordinary that scientists estimate Brazil contains between 10 and 15% of all species that exist on this planet. If you took every living species on Earth and divided them by country, Brazil would receive more than any other country by an enormous margin. And scientists believe Brazil still contains thousands of species that have never been identified or named. The Amazon River in Brazil is so wide in certain places that you cannot see the opposite bank from the shore, not because of mist or distance, but because the river itself is genuinely wider than the visible horizon from water level. Brazil has a river so large that standing on one bank and looking across feels less like looking at water and more like looking at an inland sea, and this is just one river in a country that has more fresh water than almost any other on Earth. Have you ever wondered what lives in the Amazon that humans have never encountered? Brazils. Amazon contains indigenous communities that have had zero contact with the outside world. People living in Brazil, right now, in 2024, who have never seen a smartphone, never heard of the internet, and have no knowledge that the world outside their forest exists. Brazils. Government legally protects these communities and prohibits contact with them, meaning, Brazil contains people deliberately shielded from the 21st century. Brazil built its current capital city from absolutely nothing in approximately 3 years. In 1956, Brazil's president, Juscelino Kubitschek, decided that Brazil needed a new capital city, not an expansion of an existing city, not a renovation of an old one, but a completely new city designed from scratch and built in the middle of an empty plateau. Brazil's Brasilia was designed by urban planner Lucio Costa and architect Oscar Niemeyer, constructed between 1956 and 1960, and became Brazil's capital on April 21, 1960, approximately 1,200 days after construction began. Brazil's Brasilia is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the only city in the world to receive that designation less than 50 years after its construction, recognized for its extraordinary modernist architecture and its unprecedented urban design. Brazil built a UNESCO World Heritage Site from scratch in 3 years. Which raises an obvious question: what was Brazil's old capital? And why did nobody tell you Brazil changed capitals in 1960? The old capital of Brazil was Rio de Janeiro, a city so beautiful that when Portuguese sailors first entered Guanabara Bay in January 1502, they believed it was the mouth of a river and named it Rio de Janeiro. The River of January, Brazils. Rio de Janeiro is overlooked by the Christ the Redeemer statue, one of the most recognized images on Earth. Standing 30 meters tall on Corcovado Mountain with arms outstretched over a city that contains some of the most dramatic urban geography of any city on Earth. Brazil has the largest Japanese population of any country outside Japan. Approximately 1.5 million people of Japanese descent, living primarily in São Paulo. How did this happen? Brazil began receiving Japanese immigrants in 1908 when the first ship carrying Japanese agricultural workers arrived in Brazil, and the community that grew from those arrivals over the following decades produced a Japanese-Brazilian culture that is entirely its own. Speaking Portuguese, eating feijoada alongside sushi, celebrating both Carnival and Japanese festivals, and representing one of the most extraordinary examples of cultural integration anywhere in the world. Brazil's São Paulo has the largest Japanese community outside Japan, the largest Lebanese community outside Lebanon, the largest Italian community outside Italy, and the largest Arab community in South America, all living in the same city simultaneously. São Paulo in Brazil is one of the most genuinely multicultural cities on Earth, a place where the food, the language, the music, and the faces of the street change completely from neighborhood to neighborhood, in ways that make it feel less like one city and more like an entire world compressed into one urban space. Now, here is the Brazil question that stops everyone. What language do they speak in Brazil? If you said Spanish, you are wrong, and you are not alone. Because this is one of the most common geographical misconceptions among American viewers. Brazil speaks Portuguese, and not because Brazil chose to, but because in 1494, Spain and Portugal divided the entire unexplored world between themselves in a treaty called the Treaty of Tordesillas. And the eastern portion of South America that became Brazil fell on Portugal's side of the line. Brazil speaks Portuguese because two European countries divided the world with a pen and a ruler 500 years ago. Brazil's Portuguese is distinct enough from European Portuguese that speakers of each variety sometimes struggle to understand each other. Brazil's version of the language has absorbed words, sounds, and structures from indigenous Amazonian languages, from West African languages brought by enslaved people, and from the dozens of immigrant communities that arrived across 3 centuries. Brazil did not just speak Portuguese, Brazil transformed Portuguese into something new, something that belongs entirely to Brazil. Brazil's Carnival is the largest party on Earth, and it requires approximately a year of preparation for 5 days of celebration. The samba schools of Brazil's Rio de Janeiro, community organizations that can have memberships of tens of thousands of people, begin preparing their carnival presentation immediately after the previous year's carnival ends, spending 12 months designing costumes, composing music, choreographing performances, and constructing floats for a competition that is judged with the same seriousness that Brazil applies to its other national obsession. What is Brazil's other national obsession? Drop it in the comments if you already know. Brazil's Carnival Parade at the Sambadrome in Rio de Janeiro involves thousands of performers moving in coordinated sequences through a purpose-built parade venue, judged by official panels on criteria including harmony, percussion, costume, and the story told by the school's chosen theme, and the results of Brazil's Carnival competition are announced with the same cultural weight that Brazil announces the results of a World Cup. Brazil treats its party with the seriousness other countries reserve for their most important institutions. Brazil and football is a relationship that goes beyond sport into something closer to national identity and collective spirituality. Brazil has won the FIFA World Cup 5 times more than any other country on earth. The names of Brazil's greatest players, Pelé, Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Zico Garancia, are not just sports names in Brazil. They are cultural monuments. Pelé, born Edson Arantes do Nascimento in poverty in the state of Minas Gerais, is considered by many the greatest footballer who ever lived, and Brazil's government declared him a national treasure and prevented him from being transferred to European clubs during his peak years because Brazil decided he was too important to leave. The 1950 World Cup final was held in Brazil's Maracanã Stadium in Rio de Janeiro, with approximately 200,000 spectators present, the largest crowd ever to attend a football match in history. And Brazil lost to Uruguay in the final, in what became known in Brazil simply as the Maracanazo, the Maracana blow. Brazil's response to that defeat was to wear yellow and blue, instead of the traditional white. From that point forward, the colors Brazil wears today were chosen because the white shirt of 1950 carried too much grief for Brazil to continue wearing it. Brazil has one of the most extraordinary and most complicated racial histories of any country on earth. Brazil received approximately 4.9 million enslaved Africans between the 16th and 19th centuries, more than any other country in the Americas, accounting for approximately 40% of all enslaved people transported across the Atlantic. Brazil was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery, doing so in 1888, 23 years after the United States, and the legacy of that history shapes Brazil's racial demographics, its cultural identity, and its social inequalities in ways that Brazil is still honestly and imperfectly working through. Brazil today has the largest population of African-descended people outside of Africa. Approximately 56% of Brazil's population identifies as Black or mixed race. Brazil's music, food, religion, language, and cultural identity have been profoundly and permanently shaped by the African heritage of its people. Samba, capoeira, candomblé, feijoada, and enormous portions of what the world recognizes as distinctively Brazilian culture originated in the African communities of Brazil. Brazil's food is one of the most diverse and most underappreciated culinary traditions in the world. Feijoada, a slow-cooked stew of black beans with various cuts of pork, served with rice, farofa, orange slices, and collard greens, is Brazil's national dish, with origins in the food culture of enslaved Africans who made extraordinary meals from the cuts of meat their enslavers discarded. Brazil's feijoada is eaten at Saturday lunch across the country as a weekly ritual, consumed with the kind of unhurried communal pleasure that Brazil has always known how to do better than almost anywhere else on earth. Churrasco in Brazil is not a barbecue, it is a philosophy. Brazil's churrasco involves enormous skewers of various cuts of beef, pork, chicken, and lamb cooked over charcoal and brought to your table continuously by servers who carve directly onto your plate until you physically cannot eat anymore. Brazil's churrascaria restaurants operate on a simple system, a card that is green on one side and red on the other. And as long as your card shows green, the meat keeps coming. A system of such beautiful simplicity and such devastating consequences for self-control that it may be Brazil's greatest cultural contribution to dining. Acai in Brazil bears almost no resemblance to the acai bowl sold in American smoothie shops. In Brazil's Amazon region, where it originates, acai is consumed as a thick savory paste, eaten with fish or tapioca, a meal, not a dessert. Brazil essentially exported acai to the world and watched the world turn its staple food into a breakfast trend, which is both a commercial success and something that makes Brazilians from the Amazon smile knowingly at the international version. Brazil has laws and realities that will genuinely surprise you. Brazil requires every employer to provide employees with a transportation voucher, the veiled transport covering the cost of their daily commute. Brazil made it a legal obligation for businesses to fund their workers' journey to work, which is either an extremely sensible policy or a specifically Brazilian solution to a problem most countries have simply accepted as the workers' problem. Brazil has a legal requirement called the Lei de Cotas, the quota law, that reserves 20% of federal government jobs and university places for Black Brazilians. Brazil implemented this system after data showed that racial inequality in access to education and employment was too deep to address through non-interventionist policy alone, making Brazil one of the few countries on earth with constitutionally mandated racial affirmative action at the federal government level. In Brazil, it is illegal to charge different prices for cash versus card payments. Merchants must charge every customer the same price regardless of payment method. Brazil introduced this law to protect consumers from hidden costs, though Brazil's enforcement of it varies significantly between formal and informal retail environments. Brazil has a voting system that is simultaneously compulsory. Citizens between 18 and 70 are legally required to vote, and entirely electronic. Brazil moved to fully electronic voting machines in 1996, making Brazil one of the first countries on earth to conduct national elections without a single paper ballot. In a country of 215 million people spread across a territory larger than the continental United States. What do you think? Should voting be compulsory everywhere? Drop your answer in the comments. Here is the final truth about Brazil that makes everything else in this video make sense. Brazil is the country that contains multitudes in a way that genuinely has no equivalent. It is ancient and ultra-modern simultaneously. It is the most biodiverse nation on earth, and one of the most urbanized. It carries the deepest wounds of its history and produces some of the most joyful culture on earth from those exact wounds. Brazil built a UNESCO World Heritage Capital City in 3 years, received more enslaved people than any other country in the Americas, and built one of the world's great musical traditions from that unbearable history, and contains communities of people who have never seen the outside world, living within the same national borders as one of the world's most dynamic megacities. Brazil is not a country that can be summarized, it can only be encountered, and this video is the beginning of that encounter. If Brazil surprised you, if one fact changed how you see this country, share this video with someone who thinks they already know what Brazil is. Subscribe to Untold Facts, because Brazil is proof that the most extraordinary stories on earth are not hiding in distant or obscure places. Sometimes, the most extraordinary story on earth is the one that has been sitting right there the whole time, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally tell it properly.